We hit the ground real hard, and it tore down the side of the aircraft. And I had a number of traumas in all sort of different deployments. Like I said, that add up to.
Like when you wrote about the well, I was.
Yep.
On today's episode, we have the author of a raw and powerful memoir titled "Stop Screaming, I'm Scared Too," giving us first-hand account of his harrowing yet uplifting journey through 22 years of military service. Episode 117, Rod Henderson. The One Moment Please podcast.
Yeah. I'd like to focus obviously on a lot of stuff around the book. How far did you get into it?
I finished it.
Oh, did you? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I
finished it.
Feel like I'm ripping people off because a lot of them are reading it in like 2 or 3 days.
No, I think it's a good thing because you don't want to end up like having to read a book over 2 weeks. Like that just, the ADHD kicks in and I'm like, I just can't deal with it. It was actually a good read. It was an easy read. So we may as well just pick up from now this conversation. So welcome to the podcast. I'll add in that little bit of conversation at the start.
Okay.
About the book. But it was a really good read. Stop Screaming, I'm Scared Too, which is your military history. So you've had 22 years in the military. And it was a very easy read and I loved the shenanigans in it, particularly at the start when you were at training. I would have loved to have had more. You need to write a second book so you can have more of the shenanigans in your second book.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Fiona. I'm pretty stoked to be doing this podcast. It's going to be really good. Now, look, about the book, it is something that sort of came out of nothing, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But there's a lot in there over the 22 years of being in the military, and the writing process is been an incredible journey that I never thought I'd be on. But thankfully, I'm kind of at the end of it now with it's about to be released and be on shelves in the next week or so. But all the things that are in there, it's crazy that it's on paper because, like I said, I never thought I'd be a writer. And even now, when I open up the book and look at certain parts in there, I see the words that are on the page, and I can't believe that that's actually they're my words and it's my experiences written down. So all those little things that you see in there, the shenanigans, they've been selected and chosen to be there because they fit the story well. There was so much more in there that I wanted to keep that I couldn't. And that was part of the writing process where I had to understand what added value to my story, what was just a silly story or maybe one that was best left just between you and your mates on the beers as well. So there's a lot more in there than what's published, I can assure you.
Oh, that's funny. One of the things that I loved about it was the title "Stop Screaming, I'm Scared Too," which came from a patch that you won from a mate in a poker game, and we'll get into that at some point. But the whole book came about because you were volunteering at the War Memorial and one of the staff asked to do an article on you, and you sort of started telling your story and it ended up being a book in some regards. Was there a little bit of an apprehension being a first-time author and really putting your memoir out there that you were like, now everyone's going to know? Because you were very raw in the book. You're very transparent in regards to your mental health journey. You were honest, and which was refreshing, and I think it's important for those that are suffering from PTSD. But also, I think there would have been a little bit, if it was me, apprehension in regards to I've just bared my soul to the world. Was there that for you?
Oh, yeah, there still is very much.
Really? Okay.
Yep. It kind of, like I said, I kind of can't believe that it's happened, that I'm still doing it. So when I left the military, I felt ashamed that I was leaving. I felt I had unfinished work, and I felt like a failure that I had left, and that came with a lot of embarrassment, I think.
That was because you were medically discharged.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was dislocated from my mates in the posting I was in. It was kind of just my family and I, and that dislocation didn't help. Or maybe did help in a way, because that way when I was about to be discharged, I didn't feel like I had to speak to as many people. But fast forward from just being discharged to post-discharge, when I left the army, I found it easy to get away from everyone, and we got a little hobby farm and I would throw myself into work there, and you would really have to speak to anyone on the hobby farm. So I found that gave me something to focus on and meaning. But then through a whole bunch of struggles of also being in isolation more and overworking myself, I started to find a passion in volunteering, and that ended up being at the Australian War Memorial. So it was through that process of working with different departments at the Australian War Memorial and working there, so people started to ask me about, well, you've helped us do, for instance, the helping with the peacekeeping gallery redevelopment or the Chinook gallery redevelopment teams. They said, well, why don't you start writing some of your story down? Because we've heard a little bit of it. It sounds amazing. And like everyone that's in the military, we always think that our stories aren't that interesting, or why would anyone be interested? Because it was just what we did. But I overlap with that. There's also kind of that imposter syndrome where you always feel like you're not good enough, or your stories aren't good enough. You should sit down and be humble and let someone else tell theirs too. So there's a lot of that happening. And then my wife, Kate, said, well, we're always getting other people to come into the war memorial to do their history or to help share their story, to help with the redevelopment. When are you going to tell yours? And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to ask / demand all these other people come forward and tell their stories, I need to bite the bullet and do mine. So it's a really long answer to your question, but I eventually let go and spoke to the writer there, Claire Hunter, and over a couple of hours, she started to write it all down as I let it all out, and she wrote that article about me, which she put on the War Memorial website. And then after that point, people on podcasts are like, well, come and speak on a podcast. And so I had to Google what a podcast was, because it feels a bit boomerish. But so I looked up what a podcast was.
And you're on the best one now. Come on, you're on the best one now.
Like I said, I've been looking forward to this because, I mean, we chatted the other day. It went for just an hour just from having a chat. So I hate to see where this
Our 5-minute intro call ended up being an hour.
This might be a 10-hour podcast. And probably, case in point, I've taken half an hour just to answer your first question. But after a podcast said, would you be interested in coming on? I then went, well, okay. And I've done a number of them now, and I feel a lot more relaxed about it. But after that point, I started to just jot stuff down and write it down in a sequence of a bit of a timeline. And the historians there at the War Memorial helped me, encouraged me to keep writing it down. And after they read a few chapters, they said, well, you can actually write as well. And I didn't think much of that until they gave me that encouragement. I just kept going, and here we have it. It's a book, and published. And the publishing journey was interesting because I really wanted to keep that title, From a Helmet Patch. And previous publishers said that it wouldn't be commercially viable. And that's their decision they make in their commercial interests. And I really wanted to stick to it and keep it. So I'm glad that I found another publisher who wanted to take it on as the title with the cover that's on the photo. The photo that's on the cover as well. Yeah, it's been quite an experience.
Congratulations! That's hard to do, to have backup publishers really as a first-time author.
Yes, I think. Yep.
You started off in infantry. It's a 22-year career that you've had. So infantry, and then you ended up being helicopter crew. I don't know, what's the correct terminology? I've read the book and you were referring to yourself as a crewie. So
crewie, loadmaster. There's a few name changes in there. It used to be called loadmaster, then it became air crewman. And then when they wanted to sort of move away from the gendered language, it went back to loadmaster or air crew person. And then it just, I don't know where we ended up with it. So I think crewie was an easy way to describe it in the book, or loadmaster, is the term. And that's, you're essentially a backseat driver in a helicopter. So it's a really exciting, dynamic sort of role. I loved it. I'm still one of those people to this day that if I hear a helicopter, no matter what type, I'll run outside and have a look up, because they're a lot of fun. They can be dangerous like everything, but they're a lot of fun.
And that came through the book, the amount of accidents that you knew people of, as well, like the amount of colleagues, I suppose, that had been in accidents, people that you knew, very much came through in the book in regards to how dangerous that role was. And everything's fine. I think you put in there, everything's fine until it's not.
Yeah.
And then things go
Yeah.
south very quickly. But one of the things that I loved the most about the book was at the start when you were talking about your training. And I had never read a military book before that talked so much about the conditioning to withstand and keep your bottle under fire, and just the shenanigans behind the burn when you were in front of the, I don't know how you, downrange, like, is that how you say,
Yep.
behind the
Yeah,
berm?
that's
So
right.
obviously you're not going to get shot, but you were then switching out the scores to make them better. So so you didn't
Yeah.
have to be on the range all day and one of your superiors cottoned on to what you were doing.
Yeah.
Those sorts of shenanigans I love, but also understanding how the military actually conditions you to be in a firefight and not to freak out. And I thought that was interesting because as a civilian, I've always wondered, how do they just be so okay with the fact that you've got gunfire being fired at you? And that was interesting from a civilian's point of view, just to understand that. But you then are very open about how terrified you were about being a paratrooper too and jumping out of a
Yep.
plane.
It wasn't really until I was most of the way through the journey of being discharged that I really understood what sort of was going on in my own head. So why I was like I was leaving the military, and kind of probably the best way to describe that is I couldn't understand why I wasn't having these regular flashbacks or intrusive dreams. It was more over hypervigilance and anxiety that was a problem for me. And when I saw a video that I talk about in the book, as well as speaking to a number of people, for me it was the way we were trained and conditioned to be soldiers that was actually the problem for at the end of your service life or post-service life, not being able to wind down. And when you break down how soldiers are trained, it's a very deliberate way that people are taken from being a civilian through, and in my case, infantry, where you're the fighting arm of the army, to coming from that civilian to thinking it's normal to, stab bayonets and things and have very controlled but sort of severe aggression when required to quite seriously close with and capture or kill the enemy. So there's a lot of conditioning that goes around changing the way you think and act and respond to do that, and probably getting ahead of it a bit, but there's no means of unconditioning, if that's the right term, or changing that thinking.
It's interesting that you say that. I've had conversations with a mate of mine, and to very much that effect, finding it difficult transitioning out of the military. And I said to him, you've spent X amount of years being conditioned from a young, I think it was 17 or something when he went in.
Yep.
And they train you and condition you to be this fighting soldier, and then there's no, well, I don't know if there is, but there doesn't seem to be this is how you unwind that. And it does seem to be a reason of why there's a lot of struggle in terms of conditioning back into, inverted commas, normal society from that point of view, because people don't understand that. But I think that there's also there's a reason why the military does it. And I think that that's understandable.
It's absolutely necessary. The military needs to train and condition people to do that job.
Yeah.
Because it's not a normal job. How many people do you know that want to be trained and conditioned to go and your job is literally to kill people. And it might sound a little melodramatic, but that's the black and white of what the infantry role is. And your country wants you to do that. And for you to be conditioned to do it in the manner that we were, to have a stimulus and response, to go against all your sort of flight and fight responses as well. It's a very deliberate way they train the military and train you to be infantry soldiers. So
I think it's important. I just want to jump in here because I think it's important for people, if they find that shocking, there's a reason why we have a military. The government is not sending the military personnel over to a war to play tiddlywinks. You know what I mean? Like, they're there for a reason. And I think that that's why the whole, oh God, we're going to go down a rabbit hole now. But I think that's why it can be quite dangerous in regards to the political correctness that can creep in, because then you're getting away from the actual reason of what the fighting force is, which is to protect the country and to go where politicians have sent you and do jobs that politicians want you to do. And I think that is an important distinction to make, that the volunteers that end up in the military service are not just going off on their own, doing whatever they want to do. They're sent there for a purpose from the politicians.
Yeah, that's right.
That's my rant over.
That's good. I mean, it's early for a rant, but we'll get through.
I know, I'm always up for a rant.
Mate, it's you're absolutely right with the fact that we need a certain amount of people to do that job that the government needs. In the infantry's experience, we need them, and it's part of the infantry motto to seize and hold ground, because no war can be won unless you have people that are actually on the ground to physically hold that ground. And that's your job as an infantry soldier, to do that. And it may require you to do horrible things and see horrible things. And so the conditioning is there from day one to have you in a state where you're comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that could be as simple as learning to sleep in mud or freezing cold, right through to the conditioning of having bullets flying over your head. And that's kind of what we were talking about at the start. When you're in the butts party. Yeah, that's right. You're in the butts party and bullets are flying over your head. And it's a very different way they train people now, because a lot of it's done on a computer screen. But back in the 90s,
really?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. So back in the 90s, you were actually at a range and bullets were hitting a target above your head. So the crack of the round coming over your head, you would listen to all day and you'd be very used to it. And what that did is it stopped you from flinching after a lot of exposure to it. So when the real thing happens, it's less, you'll generally always flinch, especially when it's close, but it's something that you're conditioned to at that point, and you know the sound that's a bullet passing, that's relatively close. And then from that point, your training kicks in. Whereas someone who may not have been conditioned to that may turn to water with the sound of a bullet passing sort of, a foot from their head or a couple of feet from their head. So that I think that's a very important way they start conditioning you. Plus, with the type of training that they did, we were very focused around the Vietnam style era tactics and training in the 90s. It's changed a lot since then, and the fidelity of the training for soldiers is just first rate. The training that infantry soldiers get now in the army, because they've had a lot of input from the special forces community and a lot of new equipment. But at the time, we were just quite simply doing a lot of jungle and bush attacks against other units, which is what our tactic was at the time. So it was very important to train that way and to train for that. But that training, in my opinion, can set you up probably with some thought processes for later on in life that aren't helpful. It can come back and sort of bite you. And that's kind of what I try and talk about in the book.
It's not a typical way of walking around in normal society if you're not in a threat level to have that mentality. So there maybe needs to be some work in regards to unwinding that at the end of service.
Yeah, and look, it's something that DVA has gotten onto, especially with the Royal Commission recently. They contacted me about the submission I made, and again, I have that at the end of the book there too, about the untraining process and what that looks like. We need to start a real discussion about it. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but when you keep training people to go away and do a job the government wants them to do, and at the end of it, it's a 2 or 3 day course when you leave the military of what to do with your finances and, don't drink too much. That's not a very effective way at helping untrain or unwind those processes that you've worked so hard to instill in someone. So like I said, from my experience being infantry and then aviation, which is a whole new can of worms to be open there, it can build up, I think, over time. And it's like that, everyone's got a cup. And once your cup's full, anything that's added to it is quick for it to all sort of overflow. And that's what I found 20 plus years in the military. I was full of all these exposures to trauma and as well as the physical problems I had with needing operations on. It overflowed.
You're very candid in terms of your service, East Timor, Pakistan, PMG, Afghanistan, and a lot of it seems to be centered around in the book your PNG, East Timor.
East Timor, I spent a number of trips to.
Yeah.
PNG, I went to for the crash at Kokoda airfield for the Australians that died there and one Japanese national. Well, I had a number of traumas in all sort of different deployments. Like I said,
but that East like East Timor was pretty, like when you wrote about the well, I was,
Yep.
people
Yep.
can read about that and we won't go into that, but that was pretty full on in regards to looking into that well. It was evident that, you know, when you said I had to suppress it, just shove it down, everything that you were seeing, that's the reality that a lot of people that I speak to that have served face.
Yep.
One of the heroes of the book, I suppose, is your gorgeous wife, Kate. And I think that she probably needs to have a big shout out in regards to the support, as do all military spouses. In regards to that, how much did she play an impact in regards to, or influence in regards to the book and you writing the book?
Look, a lot. She has been rock there through this whole process, and she's also served herself for 20 plus years in the military in the psychology course. So I think that really helped. She has dealt with a lot of trauma from military members. She's listened to it a lot, and she's experienced some of it herself for her deployments in Iraq. So she gets it. She gets service life. She understands me. We've been together forever. She understands my stupid, childish, and self-destructive ways, as well as the stuff I try to do to make her laugh. I laugh when you said hero because, Matt Anderson calls her that in the forward of the book, and Kate gets a bit of a laugh out of it, but she's sick of me picking on her about it because I wanted to buy her a little cape, and every time I see her, I say, "How you going? How you going, hero?" But she really is, and it's true of a lot of service spouses because, and not just women, men. There's a lot of men that are service spouses as well. People don't understand. I mean, I was one when my wife deployed, and I learned what it was like to be at home looking after children while your significant other half is away, for 6 months at a time. So the role of the significant other, let's call it, in the service family life, can't be overstated.
Your career went from infantry to paratrooper to crewy in the back of a helicopter.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you talk. I can't remember. Everybody that's listening, I'm coming off a migraine, so I can't remember if it was pre-recording the podcast or in this recording that you were talking about the imposter syndrome. And it's interesting that you mentioned it because you have overcome it at all opportunities, the imposter syndrome. So it's interesting that you still have that sense now when you're writing the book and everything. Do you ever reflect on the fact that I was terrified to jump out of a plane and I did that, and I was terrified to push past this level and I did that? Like, do you ever reflect on that and what made you push past it? Because a lot of people bottled it and didn't want to jump out of the plane when they were training to be a paratrooper.
So I talk about, very much that, about imposter syndrome, and we're, I guess, backing up from that, we're always our harshest critic. We're always hardest on ourselves with things, and I never thought I was tough enough or fast enough to join the army, and I guess that's why I always wanted to join infantry, to prove to myself, to my father, to my mates that I was strong enough and tough enough to do that job, and got in there and knew I was too scared to jump out of planes, so opted for whatever else I could do to get any other unit except the one that jumped out of planes. And of course I ended up stuck in that unit. Found that unit just madness in the 90s. The 3rd Battalion in the 90s was just a madhouse of what I knew to be society at the time, from skinheads to Cambodians to very religious people through to just people who should be in jail, were just thugs. But it was a cross-section of society that was just amazing. And I was a very young, naive kid thrust into that without a lot of life experience. So I had a lot of growing up to do straight away, and that kind of made me feel like I was out of my depth there. But all I simply did, it wasn't a matter of trying to be better than the person next to me. It was just always trying to keep up and not let on that you were terrified. You know what? The reality was everyone else was mostly terrified around you too, particularly when it came to jumping out of planes. So there's no hoo-ahs or any of that crap that people think there was. Everyone's very quiet and earwood looking when they're in the aircraft, because it's the great leveler. You can't bullshit anymore. It's just you and your own thought processes before you jump out that door day or night. So that itself was pretty amazing. When I understood I had this ability in me to keep going, to do things that my body just said, absolutely do not do that. That is terrifying. And I learnt that from my training in infantry, reinforced with my role as a paratrooper. And then later on, when I thought I'd be imposterish to ever think I'd be smart enough to go and operate in the aircraft, because I always looked at these crews when I was an infantry soldier, thinking that they're calm and cool and they know what they're doing, and I'm so far sort of from that. And then a whole 12 months, 18 months later, I'm doing that job and thinking they were so professional and top notch. But everyone's putting on a show for something. And then in that role as well, when we're carrying on with the shenanigans we were doing too, that was part of the fun as well. So it's been quite a journey with that.
One of the shenanigans was when you first rocked up to the paratrooper billet. I don't know if that's how you refer to it. And they didn't even realize that you were there. They'd forgotten that the whole new crew had rocked up, and you guys were just getting drunk for the first few days.
It was great. And I mean, as a 19, 20-year-old, it was summer in 1995. So no real mobile. I don't even think I had a mobile phone. Certainly no internet or anything like that. And we rocked up there and everyone was already on leave. So we just got dropped off by a sergeant in a big communal room, and we got left to our own devices for the last 6 months through our basic training at Kapuka, and then at Singleton. Everything you did was planned out or monitored, and all of a sudden we're just left in this room. Go here to eat, don't do anything, we'll be back to get you suited. And then 3 or 4 days pass by where all we're doing is drinking and eating and carrying on and having a good time as young people do. And then that all caught up with us when a new sergeant came along and found us there and thought that we were hiding or trying to get out of work, and our world came crashing down pretty quick. We were on guard duty and walking around with packer webbing on. It was pretty shit, but it's all part of the training and all part of service life. It certainly was the culture back then to drink a lot, and that's the way you were conditioned. You were just taught that was normal. And I don't blame the army for that. You're your own person. You decide what you're going to sort of put into your body. But the culture of drinking and to excess and going out a lot was part of it.
Well, I think that's just a representation of wider society. I mean, most times people go out and drink to socialize. Even now, let's go out for a couple of drinks to catch up. So you guys may have gone to the extreme in regards to that, but I think it's just more of a representation in regards to bonding and catching up and socializing. So
and it becomes a way of of coping later on, and I talk about that in the book. Of you train yourself in that crap to get to sleep, or to quite literally bottle it up. So I guess that's where that unhealthy obsession with the alcohol started as a young fella in infantry.
We will touch on that because I do want to come to that. But before we do, I want to go into a bit more of your career. You went from the paras to then train to be the crewy, which seemed to be an awesome job when you're talking about flying in the back of the helicopters along the east coast of Australia, looking at all the beachgoers and, on sunny days. I mean, it seemed to be amazing. But there was this underlying how dangerous it was in regards to be in that job. There was a lot of helicopter crashes. You ended up sitting on eskies because of the seat. And there's a theme in the book in regards to you trying to improve the safety conditions, which ended up happening. Congratulations on doing that. That was a few years of fighting to get that done and being a squeaky wheel. When you reflect on your journey, because that role of you being a crewy ended up seeing you going to PNG for the Kokoda track helicopter crash to rescue the bodies, or retrieve the bodies rather. You ended up going to Pakistan when they had the earthquakes there to help them out for humanitarian relief. You ended up in Afghanistan as well. So when you reflect on that side, because that was the majority of your career, I mean, you talk about how rewarding it was, but then there's also that flip side of the coin of the trauma that was coming through, the hypervigilance, what you had been seeing, your injuries. You were in a helicopter crash, so your injuries in regards to that as well. When you look back on your career, what's your take on it?
It's I got exposed to many different, I had many different experiences, is probably the best way to say that, from infantry to aviation. And either lucky or unlucky, depends on which way you look at it, to be in the Army at the busiest period the Australian Army's ever had in terms of deployments and the different types of deployments. So it was all these different experiences that came together. Like I said earlier on, that sort of filled that cup. But each experience in itself was unique, and I learned a lot along the way from those experiences. So I think if I was to change any one of those, I certainly wouldn't be in the position, either good or bad, that I am now. So I'm fortunate in a way that I had all those different deployments, but I think it might have helped if I'd understood that you don't have to be so hard on yourself, that these things can happen to you and it can be okay not to be okay as you go along. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. So the culture is, obviously, you talk about the fact that it's very much a suck it up and get on with it. Are you saying in that statement that you regret having that mentality, that you wish you would have talked more?
I don't think it would have been possible, particularly in Triara in the
Mm.
mid-90s. You just never spoke about that stuff. In fact, if you showed any weakness whatsoever, you could have invited violence at some point. So it was always about maintaining that bravado, I guess.
Why would you have invited violence? Because you would have been seen as weak?
Yep, 100%. You would have been seen as weak.
Right.
And any weakness would have been set upon, kind of akin to like the animal
Lord of the
kingdom.
Flies.
Yeah, if you're in this all male environment of 300 or 400 young testosterone fueled men that jump out of planes, if you're not seen as fitting in with the team or being up there, then you are someone that needs to be cut away or punished. So you would always try and keep ahead of that, or not invite that sort of punishment or discipline to be thrown your way. So I don't think I would have ever spoken about it there, and I certainly remember the things that happened in around East Timor, like you were talking about with finding those bodies in the well, as well as a whole bunch of other awful things that I went through in the interfet phase of my book, the Internet Standing for International Forces East Timor, where we deployed in 1999 to East Timor. I found that very confronting. Almost, all those experiences I write about in the book, the mass graves in particular, and firing your weapon at a person and not even seeing them as a person, and that goes back to a bit about the conditioning, what we talked about for training. But all those things that happened had a profound effect on me. However, at no stage would I have spoken to anyone in that unit, not even your mates, about it, because if that got out that you had these thoughts or feelings or second guesses, it would be perceived as a weakness. And in an infantry environment, you did not want to be seen as weak.
If they're the pointy end of a fighting force, you understand that you really don't want weakness in there. But then there's also that double edge in regards to, you want to look after your mental health so then you can have a long career and be a functioning human being as well. It's interesting in the book that you talk about on the bus on the way into your infantry training that there was women in there. And you're talking about weaknesses. And I want to point out, obviously, this was 90s. I'm a big believer in equal opportunity, but holding standards to be the same. So people have to pass, regardless of the gender, the same standards. So that's not lowered depending on your sex, right? How are the women perceived? If you as a male didn't want to show any weakness, women are biologically not as strong physically as men. How are they perceived in the 90s going through that course? Because they were one of the first groups of women going through the infantry and allowed to be in the infantry.
Yeah. So the first part of the answer is exactly as you'd expect. They'd be treated in the 90s. And I never pretend to be above that treatment towards women I saw in the military, especially being an infantryman. We would scoff at the idea that they would be seen as an equal, obviously physically, in any way. even at that point, though, to be absolutely honest, I knew that women had an advantage, probably more on this proves my point, on their ability to think critically and be articulate. There we go. Whereas us men were obviously, by and large, better at doing the physical stuff. It wasn't until many years later where women came into infantry after I'd even I think not till the mid 2018 or so, I think it was. So, I'm happy to be corrected on that. But we never had women in the infantry. In fact, that's what I was saying. It was an all-male environment. It was just completely male-dominated environment. It was odd that you would even see any women in the battalion area. There were instances where you'd see a woman trying to skip out on a Saturday or Sunday morning after a night of romance with a soldier.
Walk of shame.
Yeah, the walk of shame. And it was honestly, the people would fire hose them out and yell the most awful abuse, because that was how we were in those days as young infantrymen. And
But
again,
I thought you said in the book that there were women on the bus going to your training, and they were the first ones there.
So yes, there were women going through Kapuka, and they would go to other corps, not infantry corps, and we were one of the first platoons where they were trained with us, with the men in a mixed gender platoon. So they were, but then after that point, there were a number of us that went to infantry, and the infantry were arms corps positions. So you had artillery, you had armored as well, and I should be able to tell you what the other one is, but they were only open to selection for men. And then the women would fill, primarily signals corps position. Nursing was a big one, obviously. A lot of almost all the other corps except for those arms corps. But now women are able to be accepted into any corps now, and they certainly do fill all those positions.
And I think that for those that don't know, and particularly listening overseas as well, Kapuka is boot camp and separate to infantry training. So when you first get in.
Yeah, so that's the equivalent of the American boot camp or your basic training. And it was a 3-month process. They played with the duration of it, and they always tweak the way people are trained to try and make it more efficient, either because of reasons of finance or because of the way people are trained. And it kind of taps into that frustration where we're always tweaking how to train someone more efficiently, but there is never even a thought or a system given to that untraining. And I know we've already touched on that, but there were some ways, there were some changes to the way we've trained people at Kapuka, but it's generally a 3-month course where you go in as that raw recruit. And it's not necessarily like you see in the movies. This is not a lot of yelling and screaming. There is yelling and screaming, of course, and that's the conditioning to the word of command. They will scream and get in your face at some points, and you need to be able to tolerate that, because if that is overwhelming for you, then certainly the next phase of training will be harder for you to adjust to, which might be those bullets cracking over your head in the butts party, or it might be doing that section attack where you're learning to shoot someone or shoot something. So that's what you do for the first 3 months there. And then I went on to do my infantry training at the School of Infantry in Singleton. I speak about that quite openly in the book. That I found Kapuka quite not easy. I found it something that I was used to and comfortable with, because I had been an Army cadet and Army reservist before that. And I'm not saying cadets and reservists know everything, but what it does is that gives you the ability to understand the military environment. So while people are trying to learn what the rank system is or how to march, I already knew that, so I could focus on the things I needed to learn moreover with the training continuum. So that really helped. But then when I went on to the School of Infantry, I really struggled with that. And I think that was because of the mid-90s again. The instructors we had at the time were very hard on us, and they needed to be, to condition us to what we were going to do. But it's certainly, you would never be allowed to get away with that sort of training nowadays. And in fact, we were the first class in the School of Infantry, first platoon in the whole history of the School of Infantry to be back squatted as a platoon, which that really pissed me off, because we were the ones that were left out of all the ones that they'd they'd sacked and move on, and we took everything they threw at us, and yet they still back exploited us. And look, that might have been their prerogative to do that. However, the bullshit that came with it, of making us, not allowing anyone to talk to us, and was such a disgrace to the School of Infantry, and we had to go behind all this hoarding at the mess, because we're a disgrace to the infantry name. That sat really heavily with me, because all I'd ever wanted to do was be an infantryman, and I didn't think that group shame and collective punishment really hit the mark, and it was probably more of a reflection on their style of training us that was so ineffective that they maybe should have looked inward on that. I mean, there was soldiers in that platoon that we marched out with that went on to become especially a service soldiers. So that there's some really good soldiers in there, I think. Moreover, it was the way we were trained at that point probably wasn't right. But that's a little BM about it that I get the shits about. I don't want to harp on about it. The training was hard and did do what it was supposed to do, and that was toughen us up. And that was, again, what the unit was like when we got there in 3 hour in Sydney in 95. Just like I said, an absolute madhouse. So you had to be tough. It was a tough job. Actually, like we said, you're literally learning that's your job, to kill people when the government wants you to. So you needed to be a bit.
And I think for everyone that's
crazy.
listening, within wherever the government sends you and within rules of engagement.
Absolutely.
Let's just put that out there as a
and
caveat.
That's part of it is that controlled aggression. You need to have that controlled aggression. And when you see yourself or other people lose that control, and sometimes it'll happen when you're all drinking and carrying on, as any large groups of young men seem to do when we're around each other. You're always going to have interpersonal relationship issues, and exacerbated by being on the beers as well, and that happens. It boils over. But look, by and large, honestly, the majority of us got along really well as one big family. And like every family, you have your problems within it. But it was just a crazy thing to be a part of, and I didn't know any different as this young naive kid that was suddenly in this infantry zone and jumping out of planes and going away with your mates drinking and going out bush for weeks at a time was just what I thought was normal as a normal work life.
You mentioned when you came back from training that your grandfather, who was a World War II vet, had seen changes in you. Was it training, or was it your first deployment after East Timor?
Yeah, it was my first deployment on INIFIT, and
you need to explain what INIFIT is.
So it's the International Forces East Timor. It's the first large-scale deployment that Australia did after the Vietnam War, and that's not to take anything away from the men and women that went to Cambodia and Somalia as well as Rwanda, but this was the largest deployment Australia had seen. And for our part in it, our unit, 3rd Battalion, was our area of operations was in Dili, and Alpha Company, which was the sub-unit I was in, a 3 hour was centered around the city of Dili as well. So we're always sort of right in the thick of the things that were going on. And it was, for me, it was very eye-opening just to see how other people lived. I'd been overseas before that with the unit to New Zealand, but it was my first time overseas in a culture that was very different to what we had in Australia. And I was just so thrown by how other people live and how how little regard other people have for human life, and that they could do these things to each other. And so, when we came across these confronting scenes, it was a real eye-opener. But again, like I said, at the time, you would never let on to your mate that, oh, geez, that was an awful experience, or, that really, you would always bottle it up. And for that reason, after I got home from Timor, I guess my grandfather, and he'd lived through World War II as a German paratrooper, and so they went through a whole heap of stuff, whole life in the military for the 4 years he spent there in the German army. Not a Nazi by any means, but he was just conscripted in. So the things he went through and saw, my experience is absolutely nothing compared to that. But he noticed a change in my mentality when I came back from INIFIT. and that's why he wanted to sit down and talk to me, just try and draw stuff out. That typical young, smart ass young bloke thought I knew everything and thought I was right and didn't have anything to talk about, but also a little bit of that imposterish feeling that he's gone through all these unbelievable experiences, World War II. I best not say anything about what I'd been through because it surely it's nothing compared to what he had too. So he did see it, and he started to open up about his service life more in the hope that I would talk about my experiences, but I was too young and arrogant. Never did.
You never really think about or hear about the soldiers on the other side of World War II, do you? It's
No,
always
and
about the British and the
he-
Americans. You never really think about the average Joe that got conscripted in to
Yep.
potentially an ideology that they didn't agree with.
Well, exactly right. And I'm only just starting to learn a lot more about his story now. I have his photo album from the Second World War. It's obviously really hard to get a lot of that information, but I'm still trying to dig through it because there's an amazing story just in that, how he was conscripted into it. He didn't have a choice with what he was going to do. He ended up in parachute infantry, jumped in a Crete. I mean, that was an airborne invasion that hurt the Germans so badly they never conducted a large-scale airborne invasion ever again. They lost so many people. So he survived that as well. Fortunately he did. I wouldn't be here, but he was shot so many times. And seeing those scars as a young fella I was just in awe of him, what he'd been through. I guess that's also why I felt that I could never talk to you about stuff I did on peace enforcement missions or peacekeeping. I'd seen a few dead bodies here and there and fired a few bullets, but nothing compared to the horrors of war that he'd faced. So I certainly felt inadequate, I guess, to speak to him about it.
Did he hide the fact that he was a German soldier? So
Yeah,
I wouldn't have imagined that he would have received a great welcome in Australia.
No, not at all. They went through a lot of hardships when they got to Australia. In the 50s, mid-50s, he came over with his family, my mother, auntie, and obviously his wife, Amgard, and they spent a lot of time in an internment camp, being vetted and checked. He had a trade as an electrician by that point, and eventually he got a job working, as an electrical engineer, actually, I should say, but would always be faced with, what we talk about now with racism and bullying and all the terms that we say now was certainly happening back then to him because of his German heritage and probably because of what he did in the Second World War, fighting against, well, not directly fighting against Australians. I mean, that could have potentially happened in Crete, I suppose, but by and large,
He was on the other
because he
team.
was on the other side. Yeah. And I mean, my other grandfather was in the Australian Army as a padre. So this is what I talk about when that's an unbelievable story. Those two on opposite sides of the war, which later become the one family and my family. So I've got photos of them together around, my father and mother after their wedding. And I just wonder, these two men must have the most amazing stories. I wonder if they ever spoke to each other about them, but it certainly wouldn't have been the norm of how men spoke and opened up back in those days. They just tended to bottle everything up because of that she'll be right and don't be perceived as weak. And I'm not saying now we need to blurt everything out and be completely over the top and talk about everything if you're not comfortable with it. But I think that we're probably at a space now where we're emotionally intelligent or maybe mature enough to have those conversations. And young men, or even men as old as me, don't have to feel the need just to have that stiff upper lip and say that everything's okay. Maybe just maybe accept that things need working on, and you can do that. So yeah, it certainly wasn't the time back then for them to do that, though.
What's your solution in terms of the mental health side of things?
Yeah,
I mean, is there a recommend? And I haven't obviously seen the recommendations from the
for the Royal Commission.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, the migraine's still kicking
No,
me.
no, that's right.
Something along the lines of that there should be regular counselling as a mandatory thing for all soldiers. Like, what's the solution to help
Well,
serving
that's the
men and
$1 million
women with
question,
their
right?
mental health?
Yeah, I mean that's that $1 million question. I think if you just keep trying to do a one size fits all approach, it's not going to work. There also needs to be a level of resilience that's built up in people before they go through before they step off on their journey in the military. And I like to think that my level of resilience was very high with the training we got faced in the School of Infantry, as well as the
Yeah.
type of environment that the 3rd Battalion was. My resilience to physical conditioning, uh, you know, learning all these simple things of, either stop lipping off or learn how to fight, or maybe I was bad at both, I don't know. But also seeing the things I'd seen, while shocking, I'd been built up for that to a degree. And I think if you're not beforehand, that can affect you, the other end of your service. So those people that are a bit further back from the front lines, I think sometimes, mental health injuries can hit them harder because they're not conditioned to face them or see them on every day. And that's why regular people, when they drive past car accidents, that experience can live with them forever, because that's so outside of their normal and that's so shocking for them. They might completely upset them and they may never get over that. But
There's not a slow build.
no, there's not. So the one size fits all, like I said, I don't have the answer to that, and simply no one does. There's so many different people trying to work on that to try and fix that. But I think if we look at simply the way each individual is trained, whatever their unit is. So for mine, like I said, infantry, we need to tailor some sort of process, some psychological drawdown, or even physical to a degree drawdown for the skills that you've been taught, because those things that were helpful in your role in the military may not necessarily be that helpful afterwards. And when that's backed up by some pretty negative experiences, and as well as that you were trained to see and do those things, so you can't necessarily whinge about being exposed to mass graves or having to take fire from people or shoot at people or run towards gunfire, because that's what my job was.
Yeah.
It's the conditioning to take that away from you afterwards and say, hey, that was part of your life then. This is what you're going to focus on now. Not to say that those things didn't happen or try and take away from those things, but maybe try and have a process where you can compartmentalize those things better and teach you how to move forward from those extreme moments and extreme responses that you're used to conditioned to give, if that makes sense. So maybe that's the way to do it.
It's interesting because you've almost given contradictory statements in our chat in terms of how hard the training was when you went through, and that it was so, at times quite brutal, and that they do it softer now. But then that was neat. You need to have that hard training so it conditions people to see these hard things. So it's kind of, it's such an interesting position, because if they're having, and I've got no idea, so I'm going from your experience and your statement then in regards to the training is very different to what you went through, and it's not as, I don't want to say the word brutal, but not as harsh in some regards.
Yep. Yeah. So there's really two ways of looking at that. Some people will say that you don't necessarily need to bash people or hit them with a stick to condition them to be able to fight. I mean, if we look at the way they train pit bulls to kill each other, they aggressively whack them with a stick, so they just go in there and attack each other. The opposite end of that might be some of the ways they do.
The podcast does not condone dog fighting in any way, shape or form.
Not at all. But so that might be a way that you train people. You might train people a bit more softly with developing their skills on competency-based training. That may not necessarily work with teaching people how to fight either. So the Army's very good at teaching those different corps how to do their job. My point is there's a one-size-fits-all approach after that. Everyone comes into the discharge cell and does that 1-day course or 2-day course after they leave their job. And if there's these specific ways of training people how to become an infantryman or become a signal or artillery person or whatever it might be, then there needs to be that specific training to maybe help them at the end of that job adjust from that and go on to life outside the military. So
it's the off ramp.
Yeah, it's more of the off ramp than the way you're trained. And look, I had trouble trying to do the training when I was at the Royal Military College, when I was an instructor there, because my experience of how to train people, particularly in that warfighting role, was very much that hit people with a stick role and they will become a good warrior type thing. And that certainly wasn't the case 20 years later when I was in the training environment. I had a lot of problems with trying to adjust the way that people were trained now. So that's forever evolving. What isn't is the untrained process. And that's what I keep trying to go back to, is what we need to focus on.
What would be your ideal scenario in regards to offboarding to help with mental health?
Probably a system whereby, like I said, we understand that we do a very good job at training people, getting those same people who've developed those programs to look at custom training models to help people transition out of those exact roles. So I can only imagine.
But what does that look like? Is that mandatory therapy? Is that let's take them off out of the whole military context for 6 months and deprogram them to some degree? And I hate that word, but you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like in terms of...
So this is something I've been asked before, and it's hard. It's really hard to give you an answer, because if I was, then the problem would go away overnight. But it could be exactly that. It could be exactly your last 6 months in your posting is spent in a different unit, a different place to teach you with the dislocation from your mates. Because for a lot of us, you may not discharge close to where your mates are. And yes, people have all different friends in and out of defence, but you have to understand that those people that are in defence share these very extreme experiences, as well as way that they live, and a lot of different things. It builds this very strong bond. And so when you're suddenly dislocated from them when you discharge, because you've moved to a different area, that could be I hate to use the word trigger, but that could be something that's upsetting for people. It could be a series of simply lectures to talk about and give you an understanding of the way you were trained and the way we wanted you to be hypervigilant about things, to give you an understanding that, well, actually for your next phase of your life, we don't want you to do that anymore. This is how we want you to react, behave, understand the way things work in civilian world. And it sounds very basic and probably flippant, but it's hard to really put a finger on what that untraining process would be. But we need to get some really smart people together and start sort of getting a chart and writing some things down and wargaming it, because they figured out how to train people up to do it. We owe it to those people how to untrain them. So really hard to give you Rod Henderson's version of what that would be. There's so many different variables there. I really couldn't put my finger on any more than one or two.
It seems to be, from an outsider looking in, and this was reiterated in your book, that sometimes the larger organism of the military is very blind in terms of certain things. And the seat in the helicopters was one of them. So to give an example, the helicopters that we have are from America, and they were tell me what they were, the type of helicopter.
Helicopters. Chinook.
Chinooks.
Yeah, so they were large, huge twin-rotor aircraft that came to Australia when we bought them, and they had a seat for the crew in the back of the aircraft that later, for whatever reason, was said to be not at the Australian standard of crashworthiness. So they took the seat out, and whilst they were looking for a permanent solution to the problem, in the interim, they didn't have anything. So instead of just leaving that seat in there that had a seatbelt, we just had some eskies that we sat on, and you were tethered to the aircraft by a strap that was connected to your back. So it was my frustration, and that certainly, I guess, comes out at the end of the book, and was a real problem in my career, because I couldn't understand why in aviation in particular, where we said we had such a safety culture that this was signed off as and accepted, that was just fine, and it wasn't. So we would have to fly around the helicopters sitting on these eskies, and whilst
because the seat was unsafe, but yet the eskies.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
I know. It feels like I'm taking crazy pills. So I can understand that when you're overseas, like in Afghanistan, or when you're in a war, right? Like there's a certain level of risk that has to be tolerated. You're in a war. I couldn't understand why we're doing that at home and on every training mission and sortie. And it just kept going round and round for years like that. And I kept trying to get it fixed. And I probably should have approached it differently with people instead of dying on a hill over things. But I couldn't understand why people at all levels of leadership wouldn't stick their neck out and stop flying or stop the aircraft from doing its job till we got it fixed. Because it would have been fixed almost overnight had we just stopped flying the aircraft and grounded them. And look, I went through a pretty hard landing in Afghanistan in a Chinook, where we, bit into the ground with the blades, and a lot of stuff happened, and I flailed about the back of the aircraft. So I witnessed firsthand.
Well, interesting that you say hard landing. I mean, basically, the helicopter looked like it partially collapsed on itself because it was such a hand. Yeah.
We hit the ground real hard, and it tore down the side of the aircraft, and the luckily the self-sealing fuel valves eventually kicked in, but we got hosed down in fuel. We're just very lucky that day that there wasn't a fire, but the aircraft was dead after it, yes, but I think it's still considered a heavy landing because I'm not sure why, but anyway, the aircraft was destroyed. But my point is that I saw how important it is to have a chance at surviving a crash or an near miss, and to have a seat as a person of the crew meant you had a chance, as opposed to sitting on an esky. So I found it very hard to put up with the answer that was, we're working on a solution, you'll just have to put up with this until you do. But yet, literally, if a pilot's seatbelt didn't click in properly, or there was a problem with their seat adjustment, the flight wouldn't go ahead, the sortie would not happen, because it was a safety critical issue. Yet 3 people in the back were sitting on an esky seat or a toolbox, and we had an interim way to fix it by putting the old seat back in, but it wasn't happening. But look, anyway, common sense kicked in, and people in the command, after years of me jumping up and down, winching and pitching, changed that. And it was good as part of the process of writing the book, when I reached out to a whole different bunch of people that I normally wouldn't have spoken to when I was in the military, because they were a lot higher ranked than I. But I said to them, is this what happened in this conversation that we might have had about, what X, Y, and Z? And, they said, yeah, your influence actually helped get that issue fixed, or whatever it was. So that was really good years after it happening to find out that the squeaky wheel did get the most grease there, and it worked out all right.
You ended up in a billeted situation where you were no longer flying because your back was so bad. You'd had in the accident, you'd had some injuries, you'd crashed sitting on an esky, and now you were in a different role, and you really struggled with that new role, not being in the back of in the Chinooks. You also talked about the fact that your mental health started to really get worse, and when you went to your command, who was a younger individual, he didn't really understand what you were asking for. Do you think that if you'd had more support at that stage, the outcome would have been different?
I think if I'd been easier on myself, it would have turned out better, if that makes sense. So I don't want to blame command from the time. I think there was a certain level of emotional immaturity from some of the commanders that are around at the time. But if I'd had an understanding of what was going on in my own head, I probably would have been better equipped to make better decisions based around my future in defence. So, for instance, there came to a point, you have an issue with mental health in the military, and I ended up putting my hand up after some things happened, and I had my first real bad panic attack. Then I said, well, this is obviously a big problem, and I did get this addressed. But the system at the time was, okay, if you respond and say this is a problem, then we have to withdraw you from the training system. We'll have to withdraw you from your access to firearms, have to withdraw your access to driving a military vehicle. And I can understand the reason why those procedures are in place. And this kind of goes against what I was sort of talking about at the start. But the Army has a set condition response that they must put in place if you have a mental health issue, or if you have a domestic violence issue, or a driving under the influence issue. I think if they looked at the way they do that, and not, again, the one case fits all. So for me, they took my access to weapons away and my ability to drive. So that meant I couldn't go to the range. I couldn't instruct people at the range. So all of a sudden, I wasn't there doing the things I would normally be doing. And people are like, well, where's Hendo? How come he's not here helping? We're a man down. This is crap. So people were ringing me saying, hey, how come you weren't here again? And we needed your hand assisting and this and that. And that's, I found hard, because then I went into further hiding. I didn't want people to know that I was off work because, well, the alternative was sitting in an office behind a desk because I wasn't allowed access to weapons or vehicles. So I think that they need to change that. In line with that, like I started saying, I think we need to be easier on ourselves and realize that this maybe isn't going to be a forever thing either. At the moment, at that point, I was in the real sort of bottom of a hole, and I thought things were never going to get better. So if I'd had someone there that had been through it all, maybe more practical, probably better access to psych screening, to psych help with more practical outcomes. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole there, but that might have helped me at that point too. But I ended up in a hospital ward on a floor that's just for the military mental health patients, and I think that just made matters worse.
Why did it make you worse? Because
I still didn't want to accept that I had like a problem mentally.
Yeah.
That was always weak. Like physically, you could put up with a certain level of pain. Everyone's got a difference, or being uncomfortable. And coming from an infantry background, we were trained to put up with a lot of external discomfort, but probably never really taught to deal with psychological discomfort. So when things started to go south, they went bad really quickly, and went into these panic attacks. And hence why I sort of ended up in hospital to try and look at getting on top of that. Now, the course I went on in hospital was only in its infancy. We had some people that had only just graduated or were still in training at university, which were running the course. They were from these women were from a very different cultural background. Couldn't understand things. So, for instance, we were talking about who's got alcohol, the effects of alcohol on your mental health, and we know what that does now. But they couldn't get past the fact that everyone had alcohol in their fridge all the time at home, and that became a sticking point of that lecture or that talk. And we were just blown away.
Were they Muslim or something that don't drink?
Well,
or were they hardcore Christians or?
No, they were neither. They came from a Indian background, so we couldn't quite understand it all. But they just had a very different view of the way of their relationship with alcohol was. They hadn't grown up to learn that was like we had, being young blokes, that's what you do in your downtime, or that's what you do to celebrate, or that's what you do when you're sad. And then instead of breaking down, a relationship with alcohol, it became a back and forth about what do you mean that you always have it in your fridge? That's what alcoholics do. You all must be alcoholics in it. And we just put up a wall. So that was just one instance of the problems that I found. Plus, I found a lot of people not prepared to accept the reality of service life in there. A lot of people that I thought I should be rating myself against, which was very unhelpful. And once I understood that this was so unhelpful and I let go of it, I became, I like to think a better person. I was rating myself based off my experiences to others. And I would see people in there for the most trivial reasons. And I would always look at them like, oh, you're not being genuine, or this seems something's seems funny about this? How could you be upset by a trauma that seems so insignificant? So I would rate myself on a scale of where I should be or where I thought that they should be. And that stayed with me for a while until, only up until recently, I started to let go of any of that. I mean, I don't know what's going on in someone else's head. I don't know how something impacts someone else. Stop rating yourself based off other people, because when I left defense as well, I always thought other people were thinking the same about me, and thinking that I was weak because I hadn't done X, Y, or Z, or I hadn't been the person that had parachuted in and killed Osama bin Laden. I just felt like I faked myself because of this pressure I was putting on myself, thinking I'd never lived up to enough to be suffering from this mental health issues. So that was a problem for me in hospital as well. Like I said, maybe I wasn't emotionally mature enough to stop that thinking, because it was toxic. Really, it really was. And you listen to other people's podcasts or other people's experiences, and if you're the type of person who sits there and thinks, I did it harder, or I was shot at more, or I did it tougher, or my course at Singleton or selection course, whatever it is, if you're the person that sits there and doesn't listen to a person speak and just thinks about what you're going to say next to make yourself look better, then you're probably a dickhead. And I was certainly a bit of a dickhead in hospital, and that was another barrier to my ability to maybe accept the advice and to start on that road of getting better.
So you talk in the book about being put on suicide watch in hospital and how that was counterproductive for you. And then you also are very transparent in regards to your decline when you get home, and what that looked like. And people can read that in the book. If the military's not doing anything differently and it's a one size fits all in terms of the off-ramp, what would you recommend people to do on their own if they're getting out, and for family members as well to support somebody that's getting out of the military?
First and foremost, drop any facade that you have. The only person you're trying to put on a brave face for is yourself. And, people are going to be able to see through that. You might convince, or you might bluff people around you some of the time and think that you're killing it. But the reality is that you won't be, and you're only really lying to yourself. So if you think that you're having a problem with something, it could even be physically, it's something you need to work on. If we go back to the physical aspect, if you're falling behind in runs, then you need to work on your physical fitness. If you're having these moments of anxiety or hypervigilance, then you need to work on that space mentally. Don't just try and hope it'll all go away. If we had a broken bone, you would say to your mate, go and get that fixed, right? You wouldn't just put up with it. Why is it the same for anyone with a mental health issue? I think we're on the right path now as a society. We're more understanding about it and encouraging people to go and get these things looked at. So I would suggest go and get help early. It doesn't have to be career ending. And it doesn't mean you may necessarily end up on suicide watch. I think that these things happen because we bottle it up within ourselves and go and spiral down. And in my experience, where I went down to for me, so getting on top of it early might be the key.
So what would that look like? Are you talking about seeking potentially professional help outside of the military in that situation, or
It could be as simple as your commanders changing the way they deal with people who present with any form of psychological distress. So maybe not necessarily taking away their access to vehicles, to weapons. There's so many people with psychological trauma that don't want to hurt themselves or anybody else. We need to be, like I said, we need to do it on a case-by-case basis and allow those people in charge to support them when they do, but allow them to make a decision on what they think is best for their soldiers, or even outside the military in APS or in any field, the police, emergency services. Stop with the one size fits all, the arse covering, if you will. I know it certainly happens at least, but they say, well, we must take their service pistol off them and don't allow them access to this and that. Maybe change that on a case-by-case basis to stop ticking some box actually sit down and listen to what the problems are, and working out a solution from there.
What can family members do to help support someone that's going through some mental health challenges, that are serving or in the process of getting out of the military? Because you had your gorgeous wife, Kate, was
The hero.
yeah, not all heroes wear capes, but she was a mental health professional, so she had that skill level for you to assist you. What do you think people can do? Is it just being there for an ear, or is it actually helping set up networks?
I think you've got to be the one that
Right.
instigates the change, as the
Can't,
person with the problem.
can lead the horse to water, but can't make him drink, sort of a thing.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And I was being led to water the whole time, all the way through my discharge process, through the hospital. And I just refused to accept that this could be happening for me, because I felt I needed to be stronger. I was embarrassed by it, ashamed that I was this weak person who had psychological injuries, and I refused to accept that. So you need to really be the one that leads and wants this change, and wants to fix it. So first and foremost, it's on you. Then I think, for the family members, what they can do is probably not allow it to be the elephant in the room. Maybe say, hey, look, I've noticed these changes and those changes in you. Let's have a yarn about it. And it could be something as flippant as that. As flippant as that. You're the one who will notice the changes the most in your family members. So maybe bring it out from the darkness, bring it in the light, and say, hey, look, this is what I've noticed is different. Let's jump on top of this. And that's where I was lucky that I had Kate, so she could be the one that would sort of hold it up to me and say, these behaviors are just not normal. These behaviors, I see it, for people at work, so you need to get on top of them.
Completely going away from mental health at the moment, one of the things that struck me, considering both you and Kate were in the military, is that she didn't have to go away. I mean, she did the one deployment at the end of your career. Traditionally, and you talk about how uprooting your life every couple of years for a different station, I don't know what you call it, like a different location that you have to go to, posting. But she didn't have to do that. She was able to come with you, luckily. Why is that the case? Why was she able to sort of pick and choose or stay in the one location when you were off having to move around all the time?
Well, I must say, Kate deployed about 3 times. I probably didn't put it in the book. She went to Timor for a couple of months, and went to Iraq twice, actually. The last one being for, about 6 months, I think. But
I think you talk about that one, but I don't recall the others in the book.
Yeah, well, the posting cycle, though, to that point is something that's part of military life, whereas you get moved around different units, and that's necessary to a degree to keep the culture within those new units always changing and evolving. If you keep the same people in the same units for the whole time, then you can have problems in any organization. Yeah, 100%. It also, a change is as good as a holiday, and you learn and upskill new skills. So moving every 2 to 3 years was challenging. And there's lots of people who do it more regularly than even that. But it wasn't really until I was in aviation that I changed about from my posting up to Townsville with the Black Hawks up there, then down to Sydney with the special operations. Worked there with the Black Hawks again, and then off back to Townsville with Chinook. So I did everything I could to try and avoid training postings, which was out at Oki. I hated the idea of doing training postings. I wanted to always be where the excitement is, because as a soldier, we like to put our training into practice, right? And for me, that was the units that were always getting deployed. So I was seeking that myself. So that was also part of the reason why we would always get moved around. Kate understood that and knew that. She was able to get postings and positions where we were, together. Fortunate that the job she was in, there was positions for psychologists all around Australia, whereas aviation, there was only 2 to 3 positions where I could go, where the helicopters were. So we were just lucky that was the case. But I certainly know many people in the military still that go what's called unaccompanied or married separated, we call it. And that's where you'll go for a 2-year posting by yourself, while it might be your wife and children stay in Townsville, and you might be in Sydney for those 2 or 3 years. And that is something that is so hard on families, and people don't understand is a hard part of service life, the sacrifices that our servicemen and women go through to keep doing the job, dislocated from their families for years at a time. So, it's something that needs to be acknowledged, I think, as well. It's not just the service overseas that can be difficult. It can be your everyday life back at home.
Do you feel like you've got 9 lives, considering the stuff that you see? You nearly drowned in a training exercise. You survived a helicopter crash. Do you feel that there's an element of 9 lives?
There is a bit of that. And so that's how the book kind of came about. It was just writing out all those crazy things that had happened, because again, like I said, you never think it's really a noteworthy story till I had other people say, no, you need to really write these things down. So I did. I wrote about the time I got stuck in the Hewitt trainer, and people who have done Hewitt, which is helicopter underwater escape training, will know just how much that can suck. And I'd done that a whole bunch of times prior to getting stuck in the trainer once, and dry drowning, they called it. Luckily enough, not to ingest water into my lungs.
For those that don't know, you're strapped into the shell of a helicopter, and that helicopter is inverted upside down underwater, and it's training, if you ever crashed, how to get out underwater, basically.
Yeah,
and you got stuck
with gloves
in there.
on and blackout, so you can't see over your face and that sort of thing. So that's a whole bunch of fun just in itself. Some people enjoy it, and I guess to a degree, I didn't mind doing the training up until I got too overconfident, cocky, and got stuck. But so there was all these little things that happened, and I think they're pretty major things, those instances. But when I sat down and started writing, and I said it at the front of the book, the reasons why I wrote was to sort of get it out of my head, to hopefully inspire others to also write things down and tell them their own stories. And the third one was to have it as a reflection of my service for my family, because my grandfather's never got that. But once I started putting all these points down, these major points, I started to fill in all these other things that have happened. I talk about the time we got caught in a real severe rain event flying back in East Timor. We almost smashed into the side of a hill in the helicopter, and it was just luck that we found a clearing where we could land. The pilots did an amazing job getting us down safe. But little moments like we said at the start go from normal to not normal really quickly, and that happened once I wrote it. And so that actually happened a lot. And I think if people, when they write down their own stories, will realize just how many hair-raising or not normal stories they have banging around in their heads. And I just put all mine out on paper, and I was fortunate that I could write a story with it that would get picked up by publishers. But there's a lot of crazy in there. But also a lot of really good moments from my time in the military. And I think I would have liked to have had more of those in the book. It's not all doom and gloom. And I know that the title, Stop Screaming, I'm Scared Too, taps into all those crazy moments or all those deployments where these things happen. And to a degree, that needs to be the case to keep that narrative and to keep the story flowing. But there's so many good things and funny things that have happened in the military that I enjoyed. It wasn't just all those 9 lives for a cat sort of moments.
We touched on where the title came from before, and I said that we'd get into it. So Stop Screaming, I'm Scared Too was a patch that you had on the back of your helmet, and you won it in a poker match. You had to remove your good-looking rooster patch that you had there beforehand. Who got the good-looking rooster patch?
No, it's still mine. And Fitzy will never get it back, no matter what you say, Fitzy. He lost it to me in like a 2 a.m. poker game, and you get him over there drinking duty-free rum. So he put it on the table. He lost it. It's mine, fair and square. No matter what he says, he's never getting that back. But then it was time to retire that, and Stop Screaming, I'm Scared Too patch I thought was pretty funny. So I was wearing it and happened to have it on my helmet when we sputtered in Afghanistan. And it was funny because the Americans in particular always get a laugh and they'd see that on your helmet patch when they're in the back of the aircraft. But how crazy it was that it came true. It was weird when you're standing next to the aircraft holding your helmet with that patch on it, and your aircraft's all busted up. But look, it's it's where it came from, and I thought it was a fitting title for the story. And when you read the book, you'll understand why, because it's all these unique experiences, or for me, unique experiences that came together. And when I look back at all those experiences, like you said, I think it is, maybe one of those 9 lives things you think, geez, you actually did do some really cool and interesting stuff. But that's what I think is the point of difference, is that all of us in the military have done some really cool and unique, exciting stuff. You don't have to have been a general. You don't have to have been a special forces guy doing, these really intense training cycles. You don't even have to be a Victoria Cross recipient to be worthy of having a story or writing your story down and putting it out there. Just a regular Joe like me can have these amazing experiences. So it's worth jotting them down for your own sake, if you like, or even start talking about them and telling your friends and family. Because if you think about it, we did do some really good stuff, and I hope that people are proud in their service and want to talk about it more, and not just see the same books on the shelves like we see all the time now. And I guess I have to be careful. I would take away from these other people, but there's a lot of those generals stories out there. There's a lot of special forces stories out there. There's just not a lot of regular soldiers stories, and that's what I hope that this will encourage other regular soldiers just like me to get out and start talking about your service.
How's the feedback been? I know it's not technically out. I was very lucky to get an advance copy, so thank you for sending that off to me. But is it out on the 9th of August?
5th of August on the shelves.
5th of August, 2024, if you're listening to this in another year.
So, it'll be out very soon. I've been selling copies on my website. I've got a website, which I think is just crazy, considering I didn't even have social media until not long ago, really. But it's at rodhendersonauthor.com.au. I've been selling the pre-sale copies there, and I signed them, individually signed them. But the feedback has been something I just never expected. And it's not even necessarily from friends and family. Some people I've never met that have just heard about my story, who bought the book and have read it, have just given me the most amazing feedback, how it's helped contextualize things that they've done and seen in the military. So that for me is a win. But it's hard because you should never look for vindication from people you don't know, right? So that's been that's been hard to get my head around. But I found the most value in people. In the feedback from those people who have got no vested interest in telling me that it's a great story, that have actually reached out and said it's amazing and it's helped them. So that for me has been a win. It had never been a reason for me to get out and start telling my story. And I certainly don't see myself as a high performance coach or as a motivator or an influencer or any of that stuff. I just think it's really cool that a few people have read my story and that's really helped them. So that's a win on top of everything else.
No, one of the things that was remarkable about the book, and I always flick to the pictures first whenever I receive a book that's got pictures in there. I don't know why. I never wait to get to them. It's just how remarkable the pictures are. Like, you've got so many from your military service, and a lot of them are from the Defence Force. So I think that's fantastic that you're able to have all those memories and mementos of your service.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of being able to get the. They were going to originally print it in black and white, but I was lucky that they changed it to put the color pictures in, because the helicopter always looks pretty cool, right? And so you may as well go color pictures. Unless you got a cool picture and a t-shirt, it didn't really happen. So I was lucky to get both. Oh, and now I've got a banner. Hopefully you can see that there. I've got a banner.
I can. Yeah, stop screaming. I'm scared too.
As a plug.
The front
that's
cover
the thing,
of the
right?
book.
So I'm all about social media now, and I've even got a banner. So
love it.
Yeah, and look, I'll be selling merch and stuff, just a few helmet patches and some funny hats and stuff too that people can get into or not. I'm never going to get rich doing this. It's just been a fun ride to go on to tell your story, and like I said, see that feedback. There's going to be people that don't like the story, and I'm sure I'll get trolls and people who I think I've got a stupid face or whatever. They can say and do whatever they want. I'm not going to get too fussed about any of that. This is just something that's happened and has come out of the blue, and I'm enjoying where I'm at with it. And I like I said, I really love the fact that there are people out there that it's helped, and what the future holds from here on in terms of writing, I'm not quite sure about. I enjoy it, but I would like to end up maybe somewhere continuing on doing guiding like I do at the War Memorial, taking people for, through Australia's wartime past and talking about a lot of that instead of myself. And I hope to maybe one day do that overseas with, some tour company that does battlefield tours and walkthroughs, because obviously I could talk, right? So I may as well use that instead of just dribbling on. I may as well use it to help and do another passion that's guiding and taking people on a tour of Australia's wartime past.
Well, thank you so much. Everyone can go get the book. Stop Screaming, I'm Scared Too. It's published by Big Sky.
Indeed.
And I'll link where you can get it on the show notes of the episode.
It's a real book. I can't believe it. It's happening. Like it's real. It's real. It's just so crazy. Real. Yeah. And in a couple of weeks, I'll see it on the shelves. And look, it's about a regular soldier's experience, like I said. So it's pretty raw, like we've said. There's a lot in there we haven't spoken about. And
there
I
is
hope
a lot,
lot of people connect with it.
I wanted to leave things for people to be able to actually read it and experience it.
100%. So, and being military too, it's not just all about. It is about my experiences, and I've come to terms with sitting down and talking about yourself, and now as I'm doing on a podcast. But these experiences can be so relatable to people in the first responder world. People who've dealt with any sort of traumatic experience in their life, which is almost everyone, can I hope they can relate to this on a human experience of what I've written in my book, not some super high performance muscle bound soldier, just a regular soldier's experience. And I hope that's not underselling it, so maybe I should stop talking, but look, I hope a lot of people connect with the words that are written there, because it's raw. To be honest,
I think what shines through is the fact that you have been very open in the fact that you found this challenging and this is what you did to overcome it. And then, so from jumping out of a helicopter when you were plane, parachuting when you were terrified of heights, through to your mental health journeys and the impacts of seeing the stuff that you saw as well. So thank you for writing the book, Rod. I think it's going to really help a lot of people. So everyone can run out and grab it. Available from the 5th of August, 2024.
Pretty much anywhere you buy your books, or on my website if you want a signed copy. And thanks for having me on, not just to peddle my wares again, but to talk about some of the things that I think need to be spoken about in society. When we bring this out from the shadows, these issues with mental health, and we can talk about them more openly. So I hope it encourages other people to start talking about it too.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Fiona. Cheers.